IB Nation Sports Talk. We're up and rolling on this Tuesday. Hope you're having a great day. I got to wrestle with tree limbs.
I saw
How did
that
my?
picture.
Did you see it? Did you get the photo of the big tree fall hard in
At
yard?
least it's that's one can be considered a workout, and two, the only thing that makes it really sucky is if it's like sappy and sticky. So
Yeah,
hopefully,
and I didn't cut the whole thing up because we're doing a homeowner's insurance. We're trying to anyway between the tree and some wind damage with the roof, and so we're hoping to get it all taken care of. So I mostly just kind of cut up the small stuff to have more room, to pull out and park and all that
so you're leaving the
kind of
big
thing.
dog there until insurance rolls by.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, it has been an interesting last 24 hours for Notre Dame women's basketball. We're
That's
going to
putting it
hit.
lightly.
Yeah, no kidding. We're going to hit the bulk of it in rapid fire, but just within the last couple of hours or so, we've had some updates. We knew about Olivia Miles going into the portal. That news broke last night, but both Kate Koval and Emma Risch are also in the transfer portal today. A couple reserves, but both of them five-star recruits. Risch missed most of each of her first two seasons at Notre Dame with a hip injury. And even before the injury earlier, like the reoccurrence of the injury, I guess they went in and cleaned up some scar tissue in the hip from the surgery last year. She wasn't playing a whole lot earlier this season. Big 3-point ace out of high school in Florida. And of course, Kate Koval, literally the biggest player they have brought in terms of front court players, 6'5", and a lot of expectations coming out of Long Island Lutheran after moving to the United States from the Ukraine 4 years ago, but turned into a reserve. She was one of the nation's top shot block leaders early in the season. And after Maddie Westbeld and Liza Carlin both came back from their foot injuries, she became again more of a reserve, and they never really kind of figured out that front court piece just in terms of how exactly they could maximize what they had with her. And so Kate Koval, after just one season at Notre Dame, is now gone as well. So I think that there are some surprises to some different degrees, but I think that long term that obviously stings quite a bit, losing a player of Kate Koval's stature.
Yeah, and it's obviously a position that Notre Dame was hoping to get better at. They've struggled in the big category before having a true, big, and that's kind of where they struggled throughout the season is teams that, had good size and could, present some mismatches. So this roster is going to look completely different next
Man,
season.
I mean, it was going to look different anyway, and now you take out Risch and Koval. As of right now, you've got Hannah Hidalgo, Kassan Prosper, KK Bransford, Kylie Watson, 4 players returning in terms of scholarship players next year.
And I told you this before the show. You were going to lose. I mean, losing Olivia Miles stinks, but it was already kind of planned. It's just everyone thought it was a
You're just
WNBA and
losing her
not
for
the
a different
portal.
reason, yeah.
So I don't know. I hope Neil's going to have a lot of work to do. And I think next season might be one of her toughest seasons, since being at Notre Dame. I think it definitely stacks up against her first season at Notre Dame in terms of, the level of coaching that she's going to have to execute if they're going to be a really good basketball team. But it's just, it's crazy to see. I didn't think the portal would hit a program like Notre Dame this hard, but on the flip side of it, it is still Notre Dame, and I think that they can still pull in a lot of talent from the portal. So
I think they
maybe
absolutely can as
maybe
well.
let the dust settle a little bit before you
Yeah,
really start panicking.
because I don't subscribe to what Decaf 18 is saying. I don't. I realize that when you see Olivia Miles go into the portal, and now, and the next day you've got 2 more players going into the portal. Like Decaf is saying, the wheels are falling off. It's not good. I'm not going to sit here and be Baghdad Bob and try to spin this for you and tell you it's good, but I also don't think that like this is spiraling out of control right now. Like these are all to me, even though when you look at it from a 30,000 foot view from the outside, when you see all these things at once, it looks worse than it, kind of like the thing, with the transfer portal and losing a couple starters from the offensive line, after the season. And then you go, well, okay, but were these guys going to be starters next year? Like you can look at it a little bit differently other than, and then some of these other guys take off. Again, I don't want to get into all this right now. We're going to get into the bulk of it in rapid fire. We're going to talk a lot of football here off the top of the show, and we'll get back in. We're going to get very specific into the Olivia Miles stuff. Kate Koval it's a little bit touchier than the Olivia Miles thing, and I'm just going to be honest with you right now. I don't know how far I want to go with that. So, but again, we will come back to it in rapid fire, and we're going to start with some football in the meantime, because we've only got basically a week and a half left of spring practice right now, which is kind of amazing.
I think March Madness has really sped up or kind of distracted us from the grind of spring ball at the end of the day. I think we get lucky that, there's constant basketball going on between the men's and women's tournaments. And then obviously the Notre Dame team was part of the tournament until this past weekend. So now it's strictly strictly football, and there's only a couple weeks left. I know.
This is the last week that we're going to have the chance to talk to assistant coaches and players. We're going to get some of the other position coaches we haven't had yet this week, like Mike Mickens, Mike Brown, some of those kind of guys. The Blue Gold game, of course, is April 12th. And coming up this weekend, we're supposed to get a full practice viewing, and DJ is asking if we're going to get to see a scrimmage. I don't know exactly what that's going to entail. From what I've heard, like what that practice is going to be on Saturday has maybe changed a couple of different times. So we're supposed to be able to see a full practice on Saturday. We'll see exactly what that turns into and, what happens in that practice and all that, kind of stuff. In the meantime, though, Irish offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock shared some of his thoughts on his offense recently, and we're going to get to talk to him after the Blue Gold game. But here's some of Denbrock's thoughts. We've got a few different comments from him. This is his second spring running the Irish offense. So how is this spring different from last spring for Mike Denbrock?
I would describe like year one as finding out who you can be, teaching scheme, trying to get your place offensively to being competitive in all aspects, right? So that you can win some football games. And what gets lost sometimes is enough valuable time to teach and dig into really the detail of everything that you're doing. Year two offers you, I think, an opportunity to really dig down and drill down on specific details of, everything, from situational football to, how what you're doing with your stance and all those different things, right? That all the fundamentals of the game as well, right? All that adds in together. And I think if you look at the way we played a year ago, details are missing all over the tape. And if we just fix that, the leap that we could make offensively is pretty good. That's without adapting scheme and changing this and changing that. That alone, right? Being on top of our business at all positions and understanding the game better, understanding the scheme better. That starts with the quarterback position because we put so much on that guy, but that's everybody.
All right, so there's Mike Denbrock. This spring versus last spring, there was some volume to that. Anything stand out to you, Jess?
Yeah, to be honest, if you want me to be completely honest with you, the thing that stood out to me the most was the last clip or the last excerpt about details, and to me what it sounded like, and if I were to draw conclusions, and is probably not as exaggerated as what I'm about to say, but it feels like Riley Leonard was enough of an athlete to kind of cover up some of the detail things that he was talking about at the end of the day, is the way I took that. And, I think that stems from a lot of things: limited availability in spring ball, limited availability in fall camp, being a 1 year, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. You combine all those things. I don't think Riley Leonard was 100% on the details, and I don't think that's anyone's fault. But it sounds like basically they had enough talent and athleticism to overcome a lot of those finer details that he was talking about.
And the other thing you got to remember, of course, is that Leonard didn't play most of last spring. He wasn't able to practice most of last spring. So that changed, I think that prevented them from really getting some of those details. All Riley Leonard could do is, kind of stand out there, get some, every once in a while, get some reps against air. You might remember he was wearing that brace out there, and he wanted to throw and he wanted to do all those things, and they kind of had to, prevent, or they had to kind of protect him from himself, I think, at times when he was out there. But the fact that you had that situation with an arriving grad transfer or transfer quarterback, and the fact that he couldn't be out there, and you had a new offensive coordinator, like Denbrock said, I think that combination of things, a lot of those little things like he's talking about, probably do slip through the cracks, because now you're working with guys who, you've got to get at least one of them ready, and multiple guys ready to potentially, be the guy who's going to step in if something were to happen to Leonard. Because again, at that point, a year ago, you don't even know, like, is Leonard, like, what was our biggest concern going into last season? It was Riley Leonard's health. Was he going to make it through the season healthy? And it's kind of crazy when you think about it, that like that never became an issue, but so you're working other quarterbacks, you're doing all this different stuff. And so your focus just becomes something completely different. And so it makes a lot of sense that after you go through year one and everyone's in your system, now you can really drill down on some of those finer points like he's talking about.
To me, it just feels like they tried for the detail stuff, and then they lost to NIU, and then it became, well, we just got to win ball games. It just comes down to winning ball games at a certain point, and what you can do to win games, because no one cares if you execute details and you lose. You got to win, right? And so really, to me, that's what it came down to last season. And they just kind of dropped the details and were like, all right, what can we do, or what's going to be best going forward for us to win ball games at the end of the day? So I think some of the other details that he might be talking about are, the quarterback and wide receiver connection. We've heard it, talked about, I think, multiple times, that this offense is going to be, throwing the ball more and proficiently throwing the ball more. So I think that's obviously a huge detail at the end of the day. And there was one other thing that I was going to mention, but I think it got lost. Yeah, it got lost.
Okay. Lost in the dog behind you.
Yeah, I had like 2 or 3 things, and I can't remember one of them. So
it happens. It happens from time to time. Well, speaking of Riley Leonard, he is gone. And so the question was posed to Denbrock: is it now, with Leonard gone and all the running that he did, over 900 yards last year, is it almost like installing a new offense now this spring?
No, I think from a passing game standpoint, it'll look pretty similar in a lot of ways. Maybe obviously there's always little changes here and there, but from a run, where it's going to probably look the most different is in the run game, where we're going to have to, not be as quarterback heavy as a run team. So how do you make up those yards? What do you do, right? Do you get into running some direct snap things? Do you get into using motion as a weapon a little bit more? How do you account for them screwing an extra guy down in the box? You hope you do that by having some dynamic players on the perimeter, so when you do that, we're going to sting your butt. You know what I mean? So it's a balancing act, and we'll get the run game kind of situated around whoever ends up winning the job. But when that decision gets made, that's kind of how that'll kind of fit together.
So essentially, it's the same offense, but Leonard just happened to be a guy who could run, and like he says, Denbrock now, like I think the biggest difference, he talked about dropping a guy down in the box. Will they be able to devote a guy to the box? Will they have to honor the pass more, depending on who the quarterback is? Those kind of things. I don't know. What's the biggest thing that you took away from that?
The biggest thing I took away from that is how the run game is going to be, it's not going to look the same. And I think we naturally knew that because Riley Leonard provided so much production in terms of the running game and, rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. So I do think you have to get, more creative. But, on the flip side of that, like kind of Denbrock was getting into, like a lot of teams put an extra player in the box and force Riley Leonard to throw the ball, right? If they now drop that guy out and now Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love, etc., have one less defender in the box to worry about, I feel pretty good about that at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
And losing Riley Leonard, but also now having Aeneas Williams with a year of experience. You got Jabron Payne in there back and healthy. You have one of the freshmen. They're going to have a really solid 4 to 5 running back rotation. And maybe that means Jeremiah Love is taking direct snaps with Jadarian Price next to him and kind of like an altered, 2-back look. But I mean, my answer to Mike Denbrock would be you got 5 running backs, put 2 on the field at the same time and motion them around and see what you can do.
Yeah. And I mean, it feels like if you're using more 21 potentially, which everyone really wants to see because of the wealth of talent that you have in that room, and you've got a quarterback who is more pass friendly and more able, to make a defense respect that. It, to the point about dropping a guy in the box or having him back, it just makes that decision that much harder. It's not as obvious. It's not as easy for opposing defenses. If
I'm Notre Dame, I would start games off by going into a slugfest and really running the ball. And then when teams start to kind of commit down to the box, now you've got a more, hopefully we're hoping a better thrower of the ball at quarterback this season. And so then you start stinging people with Jaden Greathouse. We saw how great he finished the season. Hopefully Malachi Fields, Jordan Faison. Like there's going to be lots of options, I think, out there. But I think you can start the game really run heavy, make teams beat you or prove they can stop you. And then when that kind of gets, bunched up, then you start kind of letting things air out in the passing game. Things will naturally expand back out. And now comes third and fourth quarter, and we're just really going to hit this thing home and run this game, to the end, basically. So
right.
I like what I hear. And it finally came to me the last point I was going to make on the last question. If Mike Denbrock wants to say that, looking at tape, there was a lot of details that they missed, I thought this offense was still highly efficient and highly productive last season.
Absolutely.
And so the fact that he says that there's all these details out there, if they can get, at least half of those covered up, I mean, what kind of production can we expect out of the offense next season with that kind of talk from Mike Denbrock?
I agree. Like they still scored a lot of points. They didn't score. That's kind of part of the irony is they didn't score on average as many points as the year before, although you do have to kind of take into account the fact that you were playing more elite competition at the end of the season. So that, and you have more games. So really for the most part, it kind of comes out in the wash, but things went really well in terms of scoring points, in terms of rushing the ball, in terms of doing a lot of things last year. But again, you don't have Riley Leonard. You don't have a quarterback this year who's going to run for 900 yards like Riley Leonard. I think the most that you're probably going to
touchdowns. Like that's in the red zone, he was a touchdown machine.
Exactly. So that's going to change some things. I think that red zone is going to be something that is the biggest difference, when it comes down to it.
Well, I think the red zone makes sense for a perfect package to go with, kind of a wildcat direct snap type of look, because it basically simulate, Riley Leonard, but call him Jeremiah Love at the end of the day.
Let's talk about the receivers, because I thought that this was an interesting one from Mike Denbrock. The goal for the young receivers with 3 different quarterbacks this spring. That was the question. What's the goal for the spring for all these young receivers while playing with 3 different quarterbacks who are auditioning for a job? And here is Denbrock's answer to that.
I think from their standpoint, I mean, we have dropped the football way too much last year. We got to make the plays, make the I don't know if you call them ordinary plays, but we need to make the plays, the ones that are 100 out of 100. We got to be 100 out of 100, right? So that comes with consistency in depth, consistency in route running, and for a receiver, to be honest with you, it really shouldn't matter who the quarterback is. I need to understand space and spacing and depth and specifics of techniques of route running. And going into year 2, I know Coach Brown's had a great opportunity to really have a whole year with these guys now, and you can see that starting to come along. So I like the depth we have there. We got to get some guys to emerge and play more consistently.
I thought that was interesting. Fewer drop balls is the response that he had, basically. That's something, and he talked about how consistency in, the accuracy of the routes, the depth of the routes, and all that stuff impacts it. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just sums up a young wide receiver trying to get on the field, honestly. And what it sounded like is there's a lot of talent in the core of the young wide receivers, but they're not doing enough to be consistent. They're not consistently catching the ball. They're not consistently running their routes with the right spacing, the right depth, that sort of thing. And to be honest with you, I would hate to play wide receiver because there's only one guy who can potentially catch the ball on a given play, and you're not even guaranteed to catch the ball on that given play, right? So it's hard for me. It would be hard for me to run a route as hard and as perfect as I can, knowing that the ball probably isn't going to come to me, right?
Right.
And so I think that's and that might sound a little bit selfish, but again, I never played wide receiver, so I don't know necessarily all the ins and outs of wide receiver, but
well, I do find, like little things that I think that some young guys can take for granted, especially the guys with the most talent. And I think that that's why, like you always, there's always a receiver or two who shows up as supposedly the most talented, but you always hear about, he's still working on the finer points of the, like the fact that, when you're running an in, it needs to be at 90 degrees. There's not like a banana curl in an in,
Right.
Little things like that, that can be the difference in some of the stuff that Denbrock is talking about, like just those little things like that. Now, to DJ's question, because I never thought of this team as a team that was horrible with drop passes.
it could still be a practice thing too, and why guys aren't getting on the field.
True, very true. Here's last season, Notre Dame pass catchers, not just wide receivers, but pass catchers. So it's everybody, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs. 26 total drop balls last year in games. Bo Collins was at the top with 7. Jordan Faison had 6. Mitchell Evans had 3. Jeremiah Love had 2. And nobody else had more than 1. A lot of different guys with 1. So looking at this, he talks about it as an issue. Okay, well, the guy who had the most drop balls, Bo Collins, is gone. The guy who had the third most drop balls, Mitchell Evans, is gone. So 10 of the 26 right there, almost half of your drops last year are gone between Bo Collins and Mitchell Evans. So
if those guys dropped the ball like that in the game, imagine how some of those other wide receivers were dropping the ball in practice.
And it became a thing for Bo Collins over the course of the season because early on he was one of the more clutch guys, think of the catch that he made against Texas A&M and some other plays that he made. He was a go-to clutch type guy, but as the season went on, unfortunately the drops made him like the anti-clutch guy, so 26 is not a good number at all. I don't know what the national ranking ended up being. You might remember going into the Georgia game in the playoff quarterfinals, Georgia had the most drop passes in the nation. And Like when you looked at their team, they had more guys, many more guys with multiple drops, like multiple cluster drops than what Notre Dame had last year. But, a guy like Jordan Faison, obviously got to clean that up. 6 drops, can't have that. But you make a good point as well. Like, think about how many, like the other younger guys must have had in practice if you have a couple guys who are getting those kind of drops and still get the playing time.
Right.
So, on the subject of wide receivers, any of the young guys stepping forward this spring?
Yeah, I don't want to. I'm not ready to like single anybody out. I just like the direction of the entire group. They just seem like their understanding of what we're asking them to do is at a whole nother level than it was a year ago. It was kind of gets back to the same discussion we started with, Tyler, right? With the details, right, is so important in everything that we do. And the things that they're doing and showing on the practice field now are way more detail-oriented than they were at any time last year, even at the end of the season. So we've been able to make some progress just because of them understanding what to do better.
All right. So basically it's Greathouse and Faison, and then you've got a lot of other inexperienced wide receivers who are going through the spring. Like that's who's out there right now because of the like you don't have Malachi Fields yet, the Virginia transfer in here yet. So you've got a ton of young guys, and Micah Gilbert, a fan favorite, has been injured. He's been out the first couple of weeks, at least when we've been out there. So, again, what'd you think of what you heard from Denbrock, Jess?
Yeah. Basically what I heard from Denbrock and what these wide receivers need to do, to step forward. I thought it was interesting that he wasn't naming any names, first of all. And
either good or bad. I did think that was interesting. Like, is that a good sign or a bad sign that he's not willing to even, mention a couple on the good side?
But at the end of the day, I think the thing that they're like, it sounds like to me, they're not really concerned about the talent of the wide receivers. They're more so worried about the sharpness of the wide receivers. Are they able to understand the routes, why they're running routes, spacing, and really the details of what it means to be a wide receiver at the end of the day? Because I think anyone has the athleticism. If you're playing wide receiver at Notre Dame, you have the athleticism, the speed, the physical presence, all of that stuff. You need to understand the playbook and the why, why you're running routes a certain way to fully excel in the offense. And that's the thing that it sounds like this year is guys are no longer just kind of running routes to run routes. They're running routes with more intention. They understand, how this route ties into the overall play scheme, the overall playbook, that sort of stuff. And so, it sounds like everyone's kind of coming along and developing. And because of that, I don't think he's ready to kind of go out there and say, well, look for this guy or this guy is really separating themselves comparatively to everyone else.
Yeah. And, again, like we've only seen parts of a couple of different practices, and it's mostly position drills that they're doing, so like, excuse me, how much stock can you put in, what you see, on with receivers doing box drills and stuff like that, where they're basically, again, like running an in, or, like I say, the box drill, like the one where it's like, you do an in, you keep going, you do another in, and so you kind of go around in a box, and it's just kind of a rapid fire, catching the ball, so you can see form, you can see some of that precision, you can see their hands. I mean, heck, they all look pretty good right now. But again, there's so many young guys out there, and we like the big thing is, what do they look like when it's a real route? Like when they're actually running a post or a corner or whatever it happens to be, and they've got a defender going up against them. How do they fight for those balls? Are they able to separate? All those little things. That's the stuff that we haven't been able to judge at all. So again, it sounds like just a lot of little micro things, trying to build upon them and keep getting better. Hopefully we get to see some of them do some live stuff this Saturday. But again, I have no idea what that's going to look like. All right, so there's another quarterback out there this spring besides just Angeli Carr and Menchie, who are battling for the job. Blake Hebert out there as well, the freshman early enrollee, and Mike Denbrock talked a little bit about him.
We have we ended practice today with what we call basic 7-on-7, which is really just some of our core passing game principles that he's kind of getting his feet wet with, and put the young receivers out there and let those guys kind of develop some chemistry and do some of the base offensive stuff that we do. That's where he's getting the majority of his reps. But we've been, when we break up into group periods and things like that, he's gotten an opportunity to kind of have the keys to the Ferrari a little bit, and has done a nice job with it. Smart guy.
Keys to the Ferrari. Done a nice job. What's the most important thing you think for a freshman early enrollee like Hebert this spring?
That's easy. Learn the playbook.
Hebert, is it Hebert? I heard someone asking. DK is saying Hebert. We haven't got an official pronunciation guide on him yet, but someone who asked the question said Hebert. So I was just kind of following that. So forgive me, Hebert.
You just got to master the playbook. The faster you can learn the playbook, and then just being a sponge at practice, learning from guys like Angeli, Menchie, and ultimately Carr. But if I'm Hebert, I'm literally trying to learn that playbook as fast as possible. That way, when coach asks a question, you have the right. That was the thing. How do you? It's such a. What's the word? It's kind of a cycle. So my freshman year, the way you got reps as a freshman is when we sat through all those damn meetings of hours and hours of meetings going over the playbook and scheme and stuff, if you could answer the questions, that bought you reps at the end of the day, because at least there was confidence.
Showing that you know what you're supposed to know.
Yeah, at least you're going to be in the right spot and the right situation, right? And so my freshman year, there was this linebacker who thought he was everything and stuff, and thought he was the best of the best amongst us freshmen. And I just remember being every film room, he would just get lit up because he couldn't even have his heels at the right depth, or he wasn't lining up over the guard or the center. And every time, and the guy who's our linebackers coach, he would get into you. It wasn't a pleasant, what are you doing here? It was much more, animated than that.
You stupid.
And so I couldn't help but almost laugh every time, because here's this guy who thinks, he's the most athletic and best linebacker in the room, but he can't even line up in the right spot or know where he needs to be type situation. And so if I'm Blake, what I'm doing is I'm learning the whole playbook. And then when I'm given opportunities like Mike Denbrock talked about, of just base 7-on-7 or a shell 7-on-7, so very base offense, and I can at least, go through the right progressions and know where the play is supposed to go, I think that's really impressive for a true freshman, because we all know he's not going to be the starter as a true freshman. But what can you do to separate yourself and get yourself more reps? You know the playbook and you know where you're supposed to be, essentially.
Yeah, just absorbing as much as possible, getting comfortable, knowing how things operate, learning the offense as much as you can, knowing also that you're an early enrollee and you've got these three guys in front of you, and you're not in a big hurry, because you're not going to be thrust into this competition in the near future. So you've got time. Now, all that said, the other side of this is it's still very important for him to get as up to speed as he can this spring, because who knows what that room is going to look like when fall training camp opens, depending on who ends up winning the job.
He could be a third string.
That's or even higher, just depending on what exactly happens. We don't know what any of that is going to look like. So very important that he's here, because, this came up. There was some conversation on the Champions Lounge about offensive linemen, Anthony Knapp versus Gerby Lambert. And Anthony Knapp was an early enrollee in the spring last year. Gerby Lambert was not. And even though, most people consider Gerby Lambert both physically and, athletically, whatever else, to be the more advanced guy, Anthony Knapp was way ahead of him because he was an early enrollee. And Vince and I were out there during training camp in the fall, summer, whatever, July and August, the last time that we got to go out there and get close and watch offensive linemen do drills. Lambert was having trouble with like some of the things that you're talking about, basically. Where exactly do you line up?
Splits.
Positioning. Yeah, splits. All those little things that you take for granted. But Knapp was well ahead of him because of the fact that he enrolled in the spring. So
you can't hit your landmark if you line up 1 yard off where you're supposed to be.
Exactly.
And it sounds crazy, but again, my linebacker coach would literally cuss this kid out because his heels were at 4 yards and not 4.5 or 5 yards. Like, it makes a difference at the end. Like, when these coordinators are scheming up, every inch practically matters, and you need to be exactly where they tell you, or the play, or you're gonna miss a you're gonna miss a play by that one step that you didn't do when you were lining up in the beginning.
Goes back to the wide receiver stuff that we were talking about. Just those little inches like that do actually matter. Like, you can't just happenstance line up wherever. And like, those were things that Harry Heastand was like so drilled down into, like when you talk about what set Harry Heastand apart, all those little details like that. That was, those were Harry Heastand pet peeves. So, all right, Jess. Well, that's it for the Mike Denbrock stuff. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Yes. And I'll go ahead and ask you the first question today. And it's probably a question you've heard a lot in the last 24 hours.
Oh, boy.
So I don't know how deep you're going to want to go into this, but
okay,
I'll start us off. How shocked were you by Olivia Miles going to the transfer portal and not declaring for the WNBA draft as a projected top 2 pick?
I was shocked because everyone I had talked to thought that she was going pro. Like, that was, it seemed like that was a pretty done deal. And like, when you think about that, like in terms of like who else was shocked in all this, there were a lot of people who were shocked in all this, not just me, like people very close to, the program. Think about this. This was not like, the news did not get broken by a local reporter here on the Notre Dame beat. It wasn't reported by any of the national women's college basketball reporters. That's exactly it. And there were some, there were a couple reporters who followed specifically the women's basketball transfer portal very closely. It was reported by Shams Charania, who's, of course, ESPN's NBA insider. And what that tells me is that he, in all likelihood, got this from Olivia Miles' agent, like the agent.
Direct from the source.
That's exactly right. Like, that's where this came from. It was very tight-lipped, very close-lipped around here. And that's like, when a guy like Shams has it, again, because he's so far outside, like, he covers basketball, obviously, but he's an NBA guy. He is not like in the women's basketball thing. And so that tells me that it was the agent, that made this connection to Shams, and that's where this came from. And to me, this is all about Olivia Miles, not to me, but this is about Olivia Miles making a professional / strategic investment in her future. Like, I'm hearing that in terms of basketball NIL funds here at Notre Dame, the men's program is going to be the priority for next season, because the state of their roster going into we all know what their roster look like, right? Like, and that's a priority. Like, Notre Dame can't have that men's basketball program continuing to flounder the way they are. Like, they need butts in the seats. They need them to be competing to be, in the NCAA tournament, because that means lack of revenue when you're not in the, the longer you're not in the NCAA tournament, and they need that. And so NIL funds are going to go to more to the men's side. That doesn't mean the women's isn't going to get anything, but from what I'm hearing, it's going to be more going to the men's side this year than the women's side, at least for next year. There are a lot of meetings and discussions and things, that take place with that stuff quite a bit. So women's basketball not getting as much. And then the other side is the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement ends after this season.
And they don't know what's coming next.
Right. And so, like, right now, the salary is $75,000, not a lot. There's a good chance that when it gets renegotiated, it's going to be up over $100,000 next year. So That means more in the initial contract. And on top of that, she'll probably get, I would not be shocked, especially considering, like some of the schools that are, floating out there rumored to be interested in Olivia Miles. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if she gets at least somewhere around $500,000, in NIL money to go someplace else. She wasn't going to get that here at Notre Dame. They weren't going to sink that kind of money into Olivia Miles at Notre Dame. Now, obviously, she was getting NIL. She has some of her own endorsements and things like that. But, this is basically the opportunity to set yourself up pretty good by going out and getting into the portal and taking that kind of money from someplace else.
So let me ask you this. Do you think this is a more business / financial driven decision, meaning, what you kind of just went into, the WNBA collective bargaining? Olivia Miles could probably transfer to a school where women's basketball is the sport and predominantly, the sport over men's basketball. Or do you think Olivia Miles finally kind of wants that all of her own spotlight, her opportunity to be the lead guard on a team, to be a player of the year candidate, to be a national player of the year candidate? Like, do you think this is more of a business decision, or Olivia Miles really wants to separate herself in terms of her game and showing that she could be the lead guard on a court and eventually be a lead guard on a WNBA team?
I think it's mostly a business decision, but the other thing that you're talking about, I think, plays into this as well. Because if Miles had stayed at Notre Dame, she's always going to basically be Robin to Hannah Hidalgo's Batman. It's as simple as that. Like, Miles was a second-team All-American, which is great, but Hannah Hidalgo was a first-team All-American and a National Player of the Year candidate. So
and the ACC Player of the Year.
And the ACC Player of the Year as well. That's exactly right. So she was always going to be second fiddle. And like, when you look at how NIL money is divvied up, like factor that into that as well, I think. I do think that it would have been interesting. I would have been really interested to see, if Miles had not suffered the knee injury, how different the dynamic might have been this year if Miles had been healthy all of last year and they had played together last year when Hidalgo was a freshman. Because 2 years ago, the season where Miles gets injured at the end of the year, it was her team, right? But she's out all of last year, and it becomes Hannah Hidalgo's team. And Hidalgo did a lot of great things. She was the runner-up for ACC Player of the Year as a freshman, But so what would that dynamic had looked like? How differently might that have looked this year?
There's kind of a passing of the guard of whose team is it at the end of the day.
Yeah, because you're kind of like going back and forth. Because, again, 2 years ago, it's Miles' team. Last year, it's Hidalgo's team. And now they're both stars. And they've got,
it was Miles' team until she got hurt, right?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. 2 years ago, it was Miles' team. Last year, it was Hidalgo's team. So, yeah, exactly. And, like Sonia Citron made the comments after the TCU game about sometimes there was too much talent.
I was going to bring that up.
And I don't know. Go ahead.
I think that's a nice way of saying a completely different issue at the end of the day. Like, when you say there's too much talent, basically what you're saying is you got 3 guards on a court and we all don't know how to share the ball. I mean, let's be honest about it.
Well, I mean, they're both point guards, and both of their assists per game went down, in comparison. Like, Miles averaged 2 more assists a game 2 years ago before she got hurt, and then Hidalgo, was averaging more assists this year. And, in the end, these are 2 alpha players. And Citron, even though she's got alpha talent, she obviously...
She knows how to be a wing, a Robin.
Right. That's exactly right. And she was completely fine with that. She's completely fine going about doing her own business and playing great defense and everything else. But, at the end of the day, these are 2 alphas trying to coexist with each other on the field. And they were also 2 point guards. But when the offense went sideways at times, you could see it. Miles was never going to be a 25 to 30 point consistent scorer, but she can pass, so like you can literally see shades of Magic Johnson, as I've always said, in her game, in her passing, in her vision. And, like all those flashy passes that everyone kept complaining about. Well, like that's kind of like marking her own territory and saying, well, I'm still here. Hannah's over here getting her 30 points, but look what I can do. Like there was definitely that dynamic going on out there. Like there's just no way around that existed.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they couldn't figure out how to score at the end of the season, and it felt like there was too much pressing between those two of, who's going to score, and then when both aren't scoring, it's like it's almost really hard to watch at the end of the day. So I'm trying not to spill all my beans because there's like more questions that can kind of relate to this question, and so
no, and this is basically kind of what I'm saying, Mike. The ball stopped moving because because one of them, like he says, problem was they all wanted to be the one, and the ball stopped moving, and they scored 10 points in the fourth, and they went home. That's exactly it. Like the ball stopped moving because it's like, okay, now do I just take over? Now, do I ISO? Like what are we going to do here? And you saw so many, one and done possessions ultimately a lot of times. I will say this though. She's not going into the portal because she's decided Niele Ivey's a bad coach. I will say that. And that's fan disgruntlement is what it is. And I know that, like some of this other stuff added on top of it don't make it look great. But I mean, that is basically like trying to make one equal the other is just basically transactional fan thinking, and it's completely counter to the way Ivey feels about the players and how most of the players feel about Ivey. You might not like the fact that Ivey gives the players so much freedom to play their games and do their thing, but why would that bother the players?
Yeah.
Why would that bother the players? And it's not about the end result of the season.
I think what would really frustrate me in Olivia Miles' case is I think she was okay with Hannah doing her thing and scoring the points and all that stuff, but Hannah never knew when to take her foot off the pedal when she was having a bad game.
Right.
And I think that was their biggest downfall. And in the biggest games towards the end of the season, Hannah had her worst games, and she could never take her foot off the pedal.
You were at the Pittsburgh game. Do you remember what happened in the Pittsburgh game?
There was a lot of stuff that happened at the Pittsburgh game.
Well, Olivia Miles hit 8 3-pointers.
Yes, I do remember that.
Game. And Hannah Hidalgo, to that point, I think that was her worst game of the season. And she was very visibly frustrated, even though they were dominating Pittsburgh.
They shellacked Pittsburgh that night. Like, it was not even close how bad they beat Pittsburgh that night. They beat them by like 32 points or something.
Right. All right.
So, man, there's so many layers to this thing. Like, I think that Van List's comments after the game also didn't help at all, talking about the maturity of certain players on the team.
What did she say? I don't even think I saw that.
I think she basically said, when it comes down to it, our team is more mature than theirs, and it showed.
Interesting.
That was kind of the synopsis of that. But, I mean, again, you know what? Let's just move on to the next question, because I'm going to say some stuff that I don't want to necessarily
Man, can unload on both barrels, huh? Fill in the blank. We should remember this Notre Dame women's basketball season as blank.
A letdown. As much as I don't want to say that, it was a letdown. And the reason why I say it's a letdown is because in Niele Ivey's first season, they made it to the Sweet 16. This season, they made it to the Sweet 16. This year was like this. Niele Ivey's tenure was built up for this season. And for the amount of talent that they had this season, it's just a huge letdown to not get past the Sweet 16, considering they were the number one team in the country at one point. They had a 19-game winning streak at one point. Like they looked like on top of the world, like one of the best teams in the entire country, right? And so to lose in the Sweet 16 is a huge letdown because again, Neil Ivey has now done this 4 years in a row, Sweet 16 and done. But this year's roster was so much better than any of the last 3 years.
Yeah.
That it has to be considered a letdown.
It was a loaded roster between the fact that you had both Miles and Hidalgo and Sonia Citron and Maddie Westbeld and Leah Two King and Kate Koval, the freshman, and Liza Carlin. Like Liza Carlin was an all Big East player at Marquette last year, and she was slowed a little bit by injury herself, but she had some really good flashes over the course of the season. Maddie Westbeld obviously has been an all ACC performer, and Citron and Miles and Hidalgo all were as well. You had 3 All-Americans on this team. I don't know if anybody else in the country had 3 All-Americans on their team. I'd have to go back and look, but you had, again, a first-team All-American, a second-team All-American, an honorable mention All-American. It's a huge lost opportunity is what it is, because now, as we've already seen, the roster is completely turned over, and all of those great players that you had, it is gone. And yeah, John, this was kind of my next point. They've got wins over 2 teams that are in the Final Four right now. They played 5 Elite 8 teams, and they have wins over 4 teams that made it to the Elite 8 this season, but they were out by the Sweet 16. That's a huge lost opportunity. Yes, John, Notre Dame did beat Texas.
And UConn, they beat and USC.
And UConn and USC. Thank you very much for the super chat there, the sticker, Anthony. It's been a while since we've seen you. Glad to have you back once again tonight, Anthony Solomon. So a huge lost opportunity is what this season is. And yeah, Joseph, underachieved. They underachieved. There's just no way to get around that.
See, Kenneth James also brings up a good point about the Olivia situation. All of her friends that she came in with are also leaving.
Yeah. Maddie Westbeld's her best friend, and she and Citron obviously came in together. They've been here. Those two are both gone now. And so it's like a completely, like the team, again, even if she stayed here, the team that she was going to be here with was going to look just a lot different.
Your friends are gone. It's going to be some sort of a rebuild, and you're sharing the court with a player that a lot of people are saying you don't necessarily get along with. So, it's I'm more shocked that she foregone the WNBA and decided the portal was her move. That's the part that's shocking to me.
I think so as well. But again, like when you sit and think about the financial aspect of it and what it can turn into, like when they redo that CBA, because the minimal salaries should go up, and the fact that that she can get the kind of NIL that she's most likely going to command. Basically, it's like a 1-year free agent contract.
Yeah.
Right. Like the kind of money she can essentially get in free agency is going to be greater than she could likely get by staying here at Notre Dame for another year.
And she gets to be probably the front runner of whatever team she goes to. She's going to be the player.
Right. And that I think is very important as well. And that all that does is continue, to build her brand, build herself, give herself more value going forward.
Which is crazy because, you were still going to be, the number 2 pick. To me, this shows, unfortunately, as much as we want to talk about Olivia Miles, if the WNBA was in better shape right now, this wouldn't be a conversation. It's really it's sad where the WNBA is kind of at right now.
Exactly. That's why the women obviously stay in college for 4 years, because the WNBA compared to the NBA are in 2 completely different situations. Because the women, there's more incentive to stay in school and get their degree, because the money for a WNBA contract is a fraction of what the rookies in the NBA are getting. And again, like that's why it also benefits Olivia Miles to get that big NIL bag, grab it, bank it, and have that going for, because like think about it. Even it's, let's say the CBA goes up to $100,000. Is it a multi-million like an NBA contract? No, but whatever Olivia Miles gets in her NIL this year, she can go out, buy a car, put the rest of the money in the bank, all these other, endorsement money and whatever else, put it in the bank, and you're still, you've got like $100,000 a year or whatever to live on, like you're doing pretty well. And then as she, continues to become a bigger star when she's in the WNBA, that's a chance to continue to make more money and endorsements. Because that's the other thing that's come around now is you're seeing, like look at Angel Reese and, her national commercials that she's got right now. And even obviously, like the college players, like look at Notre Dame women's basketball and the opportunity, like the All-State commercial that they were in, all those different things. It's at least getting better for them. Okay, Jess. So hot seat talk relative to Notre Dame women's basketball. Overreaction or legit?
I don't want to get on here and say this, but I have to be honest. And a lot of it goes back to kind of what my rationale for this is I believe a hot seat is warranted. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm calling for a job or saying that these things need to happen or they need to be fired or that sort of thing. But when you 4 years in a row have the exact same result and your roster has consistently gotten better every year, and there were a lot of expectations, and that's the hard part about this is expectations are generated by everyone who's not on that team and playing the games.
Correct.
And so you can build up and say, well, yeah, the expectation was Final Four. That's a lofty expectation. At the end, it's still hard to get down to the Final Four at the end of the day. But falling short at the Sweet 16 for a fourth year is unacceptable, in my opinion, considering this roster is far better than the roster that she had in year one, but you're still getting the same result. And so I'm not calling for the job. I think the seat is getting warm. It's preheating. And I think a conversation is at least warranted to see where things went wrong. Just a conversation, like I think Neil needs to grow as a coach and use this season as an opportunity, because I guarantee there's no one more upset and frustrated right now than Neil Ivey with how the season has ended.
Exactly.
Where things are happening in the transfer report. Like Neil Ivey is a great person, a great coach, and uber competitive. And so I guarantee she has, stayed up late at night, thought about the TCU game, thought about the Florida State game, thought about the North Carolina State game that went to multiple, like all those games she's reliving in her head. I needed more out of this season to comfortably say it's not an overreaction.
I hear what you're saying. I do think it's an overreaction. And look, it took Muffet McGraw 10 years to get to her first Final Four.
And it's hard. It's hard at the end of the day.
Right. And then after winning their first championship, it took them 10 more years to get back to another Final Four. The year after winning the 2001 national championship, they were an 8 seed playing at Tennessee the next year when Pat Summitt was still there and Tennessee was still a national power. I can't remember if they won. I think UConn actually won the national championship that year. But then the next year after that, in 2003, they were an 11 seed. 2 years after winning the national championship, Muffet McGraw's team was an 11 seed. Now that team actually overachieved and made it into the Sweet 16, but there were plenty of early exits, first round exits, second round exits, all that kind of stuff. Like go across the board. It took Gino Auriemma 6 years to go to his first Final Four, 10 to win his first championship. Took Dean Smith 21 years to win his first championship, So the thing about Niele Ivey is she is a first-time head coach, and you knew, again, very similar to Marcus Freeman, there was going to be a learning curve
There's
that
be lumps
came
along the way.
along with that. Yeah, that there would be some lumps that came along the way. But again, like go back to the gap between Muffet McGraw's first national championship and their next Final Four. Do you know what happened in between there? A little bit more than midway, after some of those lean years that followed the national championship. Neil Ivey joined the team as an assistant coach, and Skylar Diggins was recruited, and Arike Agumbawale was recruited, and Jewel Lloyd.
Yeah, I
and,
saw someone in the chat say recruiting was an issue. That's the furthest thing from being an issue right now. Neil Ivey can recruit.
Recruiting is not an issue, and that's my point. And Muffet herself told me directly in an interview that I had with her after winning the second championship in 2018, the difference between being the consistently good program that is just getting to NCAA tournaments and a program that is legitimately going to compete for the championships. Like, it's not about the X and O and the coaching. It's about recruiting the elite players. And that's what you have in Neil Ivey. So if anyone is anxious to pull the trigger with Neil Ivey right now, well, what's going to happen to your recruiting if Neil Ivey is gone and you've got another coach? Like, you can probably get, or you would be able to get, you'd get some good coaches. There'd be a nice list of coaches. But if you look at the women's game right now, there are maybe 6 or 7 coaches who I would call elite recruiters. And Neil Ivey is one of those 6 or 7. You go Ivy, you go Gino, you go Don Staley, obviously, you go Lindsey Gottlieb at USC, you go Vic Schaefer down at Texas. I'm trying to think. There's probably Kim Mulkey. You have to include that, her on that list, whether you like her or not. And that's probably pretty much it, unless there's somebody I'm not thinking of. There are not very many who fall into that elite recruiting category, and
year in and year out, not just
right.
one hit wonders.
Exactly, because look, you've got Citron, and you've got Miles, and you've got Hidalgo.
You had Koval too,
and you've got you had Koval, but you obviously recruited her and signed her. That's exactly right. So, and that was like when Ivy was an assistant and Muffet McGraw was the coach. I mean, you had a coach who obviously had a lot more experience, and she was the X and O person, and Neil Ivey helped her, fill up on the elite players that started coming in. Now, I want to know, like, what's the extreme dysfunctionality, John? Like, explain that to me, because I get to peek behind the curtain quite a bit, and I don't see dysfunction going on behind the curtain that most people don't get to see. Like, I'm not, again, like, if all you're doing is looking at the past 2 days and you see 3 players going to the transfer portal, well, yeah, it looks bad. But like, look at the track record of the last 5 years. After Ivy's first year, you saw some players she inherited enter the portal. And, like, some of them were, it was a little bit good riddance, to be quite honest. And like what they've done in the places that they went to play, it didn't really amount to a whole lot. Then the next year you saw a couple more, and then really until last year when Nat Marshall decided to transfer to Miami, they went a couple years without one player going into the portal. So, like, I don't see the dysfunction that you're talking about. We're talking about right now kind of like everything looks worse because of all these players that you're losing to graduation and expiring eligibility. And then you have a couple players hit the portal, and it definitely looks like alarm bells, but I don't see alarm bells. And like if you're looking at, like what you're going to do next, TCU had 9 players on their roster who came to them via the transfer portal in the last 2 years, and they just went to the Elite 8. So it's not like you can't win by putting your roster together that way. Obviously don't want to be doing that every year. And I know that, a lot of people aren't satisfied with the fact it's like, what's up with the one player, recruiting class and that kind of stuff. I mean, that is, like, that is part of why you are where you are right now. But the other side of that is, if you go out and you give a couple roster spots to players who are, not 5-star, they're like 4-star or even below, you end up with Abby Prohaska in your starting lineup. Like, nothing against Abby Prohaska, great attitude and all that kind of stuff. She hit the transfer portal as well, but that's what you end up with. When you settle for those kind of players just to fill a roster spot, that's what you end up with in your starting lineup. And then you're consistently, instead of even getting to the Sweet 16, all of a sudden you're a first and second round team because that's what you've got on your roster.
Yeah, I agree. I think the number one thing I need to see from Niele Ivey between now and next season is a lot of self-reflection. And to be honest with you, maybe it's kind of time to shake things up or trim off the fat a little bit and bring in a little bit new perspective and that sort of thing. I think that there are certain areas on the team where they can definitely get better. And I think that's up to Niele Ivey to do some self-reflection and decide, it's kind of time to be a little bit more stern. And that's what we saw from Marcus Freeman when he really kind of turned the corner. I feel like is he kind of cut off that fat a little bit, brought in more of guys that he knew were going to get the job done at different position coaching levels. And they kind of, they were all in the same mindset and they all had the same goal. And it was less of buddy and we're here to get the job done essentially. And I think that's what you're going to see ultimately from Niele Ivey is, Marcus Freeman talks about questioning everything and having a relentless attitude and all that stuff. Like that's what I think is going to be on Niele Ivey's mind this offseason is kind of questioning just about everything and where they can get better and cut the fat in some areas.
No, I agree with that. And I think that has to be kind of like what the reflection that she's able to do after this season, after going, because as you said, like their first Sweet 16, let's not forget they were a 5 seed. They went to Oklahoma. They didn't even get to host, and they thumped Oklahoma down there in Norman, and they made it to the Sweet 16. The last 3 years they've been hosts, and that means that they've been, 2 and 3 seeds, and so I guess the point is, and I think that you've said this, the roster that they had this year was better overall than any of the previous 3 rosters.
And so that's what makes this situation so hard right now.
Right. And that's why I think that as the head coach, you have to sit back and, challenge everything. To your point. Yeah. You have to evaluate everything. How am I doing things? How are my assistant coaches doing
how
things?
How are we preparing? How are we, practicing off season, strength and conditioning, like all of it.
Right. And there might be some tough decisions that you have to make. That's exactly right.
But if you are serious about making that next step and losing this past round really upset you and dug as deep as it should, then you have to make those tough decisions. Because you're the head coach of one of the premier basketball programs in the entire country.
Casey said, and, in case you missed it, at the top of the show, Kate Koval and Emma Risch both hit the portal today as well. Casey said that Kate should have played more. Their games where she had 4 minutes more. And that's like, she was in the starting lineup. She had 5 block shots against Texas in the win over Texas. That was back in December, but that was before Maddie Westbeld and Liza Carlin, both came back. But I do agree, Koval unfortunately became really a non-factor for most of the rest of the season. There were a couple of flashes late in the season where I thought she gave them some really good minutes, but looking at her psyche, it's like she went from being a starter to like deep bench player.
And that probably, played a role in her decision today. You were considered probably the top big recruit in the country. You came in, you did everything you were supposed to. You had a starting spot, and then halfway through the season, you went from a starter, from someone who has very dwindling minutes just about every game, and then you couldn't hardly work your way back into the court. I don't know if they lost trust in her, if her conditioning became an issue. what it was, if they felt like, with the guards, they wanted a lineup that could more run up and down the court. So they went more, with a kind of an athletic and Carlin and King type situation. But it's just really hard to say. I'm sure it all kind of factors into it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that just the way, like that, the post positions, like they got Lauren Ebo out of the portal a couple of years ago. They got Kylie Watson a couple of years ago out of the portal. I think they both came in at the same time, and then Watson was obviously hurt. And again, Koval was like she's the first true post player of the 5 years that Niele Ivey has been here, really 4 recruiting cycles, but the first post player that that they've been able to sign. And obviously she was literally and figuratively a big one, 6'5". And the fact that she was the number 1 rated post player in the country, number 5 player overall. Now, again, like the way the team was built, you had a true power forward in Leah Tu King. You had Maddie Westbeld, who is more of a 4 as well, if not, more like stretch 4, obviously, but they weren't able to kind of solve that piece where it really felt like, especially in a game like TCU, like I thought going in between Koval, Carlin, and Westbeld, you've basically got 15 fouls to use against Sedona Prince, and they didn't, that, again, I'm not a coach, but that was, not necessarily the approach they took in that game. Things have to get better, both from a recruiting standpoint and from a development standpoint with the post specifically, though. That's just, there's just no doubt, like it can be guard you all you want, but you got to recruit that position more consistently. You've got to develop that position much more consistently as well.
Phew.
Anything else basketball wise we want to hit before we move on?
I don't think so. I think we've gone pretty deep into that one. And again, the more we go and the more reactions we get from the chat, I think the more frustrated I'll get and say things that I don't necessarily want broadcast on Irish Breakdown.
All right. I wanted to get your take on something that Chris Ash said recently. They've got like he obviously takes over for Al Golden, and they're largely keeping the defense the same. But one tweak that Chris Ash is tinkering with this spring is lining the defensive ends up in a 7 technique, which is basically a little bit wider on the inside shoulder of the tight end. Here is Ash's explanation for that.
Yeah, I can just speak to a couple of things. When I got here, this defense wasn't broke. This defense has been well coached. It's performed at a high level. Conceptually, they've been doing things that I really believe in. So my objective was really to identify some things maybe we could do better, or we could put players in position to really help their skill set. And that's one thing that we did. We kind of we're just taking a look at different ways to play our defensive ends to help them rush the passer and force one-on-one blocks with tight ends more. But we're just checking it out this spring. So far, so good. I think they like it.
It was literally like Mike Denbrock waited for Chris Ash to start talking and then just started barking over him in the background. You can tell they were very close in proximity to one another when they were answering questions. So what do you think about this tweak up front, Jess?
I think the tweak makes sense considering Notre Dame got burned on a lot of off tackle type runs, perimeter type runs. Like that's what gashed them against NIU. I think that's, like when we were talking earlier in the season, we thought that Notre Dame was kind of like that was where they were weak, right? Like those kind of off tackle runs. And to me, if you're Chris Ash coming in and you're watching film and you're looking at things that you might want to tweak, the outside perimeter run is one of those things. Like, don't get me wrong, Notre Dame had great safeties coming down, but outside of that, like they got burned on the edge. Like if they were to get burned in the run game, it was usually on the perimeter or off those kind of off tackle veer type concepts, basically. And so when you introduce a 7 technique, you're basically putting that that end man on the line of scrimmage on the inside shoulder of the tight end or the outside shoulder of the tackle. And so, yeah, like it makes sense to me, but hopefully, obviously you don't want to, lose interior run because of it. It's a balance, right? And so, that's I think the cool part about Chris Ash coming in is he's fresh eyes and fresh perspective on things that you're not necessarily overhauling, but you're finding little things to tweak here and there to kind of take you to the next level.
Exactly. I think it's an interesting little move, and again, a subtle tweak to see if maybe they are kind of able to shore that stuff up, because he talked about the fact that can help you in run support as well. Kind of like getting that body a little bit farther outside, and again, something that they are tweaking during the spring, and I think seeing exactly how it works if they do, if it does what they think it's going to do. So be interesting to see, excuse me, if they keep that going forward once they get into fall camp and the season as well. Fill in the blank. Stanford hiring Frank Reich as interim head coach after firing Troy Taylor last week. Is blank.
Is an Andrew Luck hire? I mean, let's be real. What's the connection? Andrew Luck, that was Frank Reich was a head.
I needed a head coach, and so I went out and I brought in Frank Reich.
Frank Reich is a guy that has a track record of not only being an NFL coach, but he was a successful offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, that sort of thing. And he was the head coach of the Colts in Andrew Luck's last season in 2018. They had a good season. Obviously, we all know Andrew Luck decided to retire after that season. And so, to me, if you're in a pinch and you need a guy who's got a lot of head coaching experience, is kind of maybe in some murky waters right now because of, how his coaching career maybe ended or the lack of success he had, in Carolina, but he's still a trustworthy guy. He's going to help you bridge the gap in this one season because they're likely just going to hire a new coach after this season. I think it just bodes well for both sides. Someone that Andrew Luck is confident in, someone that he trusts, someone that he knows a lot of football. And then on the flip side, if you're Frank Reich, it's like kind of like the last year of your contract type thing. It's like a prove me year, right? Like if he's super successful and has some sort of, good season, 6-6, 7-5, I'm sure there's going to be other teams out there willing to take a chance on Frank Reich now.
Well, and we kind of touched on this last week after they made the move to fire him. And look, it sounds like they had no choice but to fire Troy Taylor. But the fact that they were midway through the spring, or to whatever degree through the spring, that complicates things, because like, what are you going to do at this point? Like everybody else is in their spring as well and like gearing up for their season now. And you've got all this staff. So, like, what were you going to do? This seems like the best solution because Andrew Luck obviously has the relationship with Frank Reich going back to when he played for him with the Indianapolis Colts. I think that they were together for like 1 year there with the Colts. Yeah, 1 year with the Colts. And he obviously has head coaching experience, and it just feels, like he could just kind of come in, be that CEO fit, oversee things on both sides of the ball, hopefully be able to communicate pretty well. And who knows, like, from their aspect, if it works out, if they're even around 500 after something like this happens in the middle of your spring, that's probably a success. And maybe it turns into something more long-term than Frank Reich, So
I just don't think there's any real losing in this situation.
Yeah. People are in on things that you're saying today, Jess.
I feel like it's been recently too. Even Vince a couple of days ago was like, "Wow, you just made a really good point there." And I was like, "I don't think I've ever heard you say that before."
Well, it's usually because Vince doesn't listen to anything either one of us says. So
he just waits. Okay, my turn.
Talk. Yeah, that's right. Reads the chat and waits to talk. That's what he does. Love you, Vince. Seriously. So Cubs TV announcer John Sciambi says both teams in a baseball game should not be able to wear alternate uniforms in the same game. Sciambi says only one alternate game one alternate per game should be allowed, and the other uniform should be either traditional, home or away uniform. He says that when both teams wear alternates, it feels like travel ball or slow pitch softball. Do you buy or sell that, Jess?
So when I was watching this game the other night and he made the comments, I sold it in the moment because it felt very get off my lawn, grandpa type vibe, right? But then the more I sat back and thought about it, I kind of, and not even kind of, I'm a full buy on this. And the reason why
Interesting
is it's professional. We're professional baseball players at this point. And I don't need, and honestly, I think this could go beyond just baseball. I think this could apply to basketball. I think this could imply to football. If you're playing a standard game inside, one team's home, one team's away, no neutral site, I'm buying that one team should only be allowed to wear the alternates. It shouldn't be a highlighter fest. It shouldn't be let me wear my cool uniforms all the time. If you're the home team and you decide to wear the alternate, then the away team should wear their traditional aways.
Yeah, but like if it's a throwback uniform, don't you want both teams wearing throwback uniforms? Like I'd be sitting there the whole time going, man, I wish my team was wearing the throwback uniform instead of the other team. Like it would look pretty cool.
I mean, under no particular setting, like it's not throwback night, it's not City Connect night, just a random Tuesday night game. I kind of agree with this. I don't see the need for both teams to wear their bright, alternate, colorful uniforms. Like, if the home team wants to wear their alternate, cool. That means the away team wears their traditional aways. If the home team forgoes their traditional, or if they just want to wear their traditional home jerseys and forego the alternate, then you give the road team the option to wear the alternate jersey. But both of them wearing the alternate jersey feels like it's less professional. And I agree. It feels like travel baseball or a slow pitch slugfest where guys can wear bright green or bright pink or bright orange uniforms. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm turning into a grandpa, but at the end of the day,
yes, you are. This is like you're barking right up Vince's alley. I feel like you're right on his heels.
And the thing is like most of the time I don't agree with John Sciambi, and I think he is a bit of the get off my lawn guy. But I agree with this. I like the old school. You either wear the alternate or you wear the traditional home and away.
So this is a sell for me. I'm completely opposite of you. I think both teams should be wearing it. Like, what's the purpose in one team wearing an alternate uniform if the other team is not going to wear an alternate uniform? Now, like you mentioned, the City Connect, I think those are the dumbest, most hideous uniforms that have ever been created, but they're probably more for young people like you. Like, do you like the City Connect uniforms in general?
Yeah, I do.
See, I don't. I can't stand the City Connect. I would much rather see old school throwbacks. And again, like if it's the Atlanta Braves and they're wearing those cool 1970s throwbacks with the small A, and the tricolor hat on top and, like the cool sleeves and the jerseys, like the Dale Murphy uniforms, basically, like I want the Pittsburgh Pirates to also be wearing their throwbacks. I want the Stargell Stars, and with the hats and all that stuff up top. And I want the all yellow, and Dave Parker smoking a cigarette while you're at it. Like that's what I want for my throwback baseball uniforms. If one team is wearing them, I want both teams wearing them. And really it's the same in football as well. I don't want one team wearing an alternate, like I don't want the Green Bay Packers wearing those hideous looking, like tan uniforms. And, then, like the other team, the Minnesota Vikings, just wearing a regular Vikings uniform, even though the Vikings really don't have much variance in their throwbacks and the Lions really don't either. But, I agree with Joe. I think that Sciambi is being a boomer, and this is the most boomer take you've ever had, Jess. So I couldn't disagree with you more.
Did you think I was going this route?
I did not, because you came up with this question, and
it's a good question, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. Good question. Got another baseball question, because the torpedo bat is the talk of Major League Baseball here in the first week of the season. It's a new bat design where wood is moved down lower on the barrel of the bat after the label and shapes the end of the bat. It ends up looking kind of like a bowling pin.
I think a bowling pin is the best way to describe it.
Yeah. They became a hot topic after the Yankees hit 15 home runs against the Brewers during opening weekend. So are you in or out on these torpedo bats?
I'm in on it, and honestly, I'm quite jealous that I wasn't this genius who came up with the guy. Basically
Someone's going to
this.
make some money off this now.
I know, right? And so this guy basically read the rule book and then did a lot of analytics and was like, you guys seem to really hit the ball in this one spot. Why don't we move more of the bat to that one spot and just make sure we still follow the same rules, right? Because these bats are completely legal. And I was listening to an interview last night of Alec Baum after the Phillies played, and the reporter basically asked him, when are you going to get your hands on a torpedo bat or something like that? And he's like, well, to be honest with you, this isn't a new concept. Like, all these batting companies know about it, and it's something that's been tested he basically said in the offseason, Marucci, Victus, Louisville Slugger, they all bring in all their players. They put a bunch of, markers on them, and they just swing and swing and swing, and they consistently see, everyone gets fitted for a bat, right?
Yeah.
And so
like Marucci's got their bat lab down there in Louisiana, and I guess they brought a bunch of people in to do testing on where exactly, they were hitting, where exactly on the bat that, they were making contact.
So for every batter, this doesn't necessarily make sense. If you're a guy who hits the ball all over the bat, then it doesn't really make sense to move it all centrally in one spot. This is for guys who consistently just seem to hit the ball in the same spot.
This is like Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber is an easy, Kyle Schwarber should have a torpedo bat.
Yes.
And he would just launch everything because he barrels everything as it is. So if you gave him one of these things, he'd probably hit 70 home runs this season.
Right. And so it to me, this is really fascinating because a lot of the biggest gripes with the MLB is it's not enough action based, right? And so if you got guys now cranking out home runs and getting more extra base hits and bringing more excitement to baseball just because they're shifting where you put some of the wood on the bat, I have no problem with this because, again, this isn't this can't be used for everyone. This is a situational thing, and they're still within the confines of the rule book. They're not cheating. They're not, moving. These bats aren't illegal. They're not corked. They're none of those things. They're just simply shifting the distribution of wood throughout the bat because certain hitters are more prone to hitting it in that same spot every single time. Yeah. It just sucks that the Yankees had to debut it because everyone hates the Yankees.
And now everyone thinks it's a Yankees thing.
Yeah, and everyone thinks it's, the Yankees are geniuses and the Yankees are cheating and the Yankees.
There was a guy for the Reds yesterday who had a huge game, and he was
Ellie De La Cruz, 2 home runs, 7 RBIs in his debut with the torpedo bat. So that's what I mean. Like, if Ellie De La Cruz got a torpedo bat in 2 days, it's not just this new invention. This has been going on. It's just the Yankees finally had enough stones to debut it and be like, you know what, we're just gonna try it, right? And it's helped them out. And I think that there are other players in the league that'll help out too. But, these guys have been in, like you're saying, they have these hitting labs. They've been in there. This is a thing. It's not just like it came out of nowhere. This is something that's been in the works for a long time. But finally, the Yankees just kind of bit the cord and were like, you know what? Screw it. We're just going to do it. And, of course, they hit 15 home runs in 3 games against the Brewers.
Brian says Lindor has been using it all season, as in all week, basically. So
okay.
But yeah, you know what I'm saying. All right. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially there have not been that many advancements in baseball.
Right. That's the cool part too, I think, is for a sport that is so deep rooted in traditions and things never really changing, all of a sudden now we have this new bat and their success. I don't know, I kind of like it. I like the fact that they made the bases bigger. I like the fact that they're experimenting with the bats. I like the fact that they're maybe going to go to this challenge system where you can challenge balls and strikes quickly. I don't know. I think it's impressive on the MLB's part to be kind of reactive to being like, you know what? We need to find a way to make this game a little bit more interesting. And I think they're doing a good job. I personally didn't need it. I can watch baseball every day and be fine with it, but they're finding ways to bring more excitement.
I think that Vince would probably be out on everything that you just said that you like.
Him and John Kristovic. I'm so glad John Kristovic is not in the chat today. He would have agreed with me on the
Ouch.
alternates, though. He would have agreed with me on the alternates.
I think you're right. That might be the only thing. Well, yeah, that's true because it's like I don't need both teams wearing them. Yeah, that would probably be. I don't know what John actually sounds like, but that's my John impersonation.
John, I know you're probably going to listen to this at some point.
Yins are going to wear them 2 uniforms. Mr. Pittsburgh. All right. Well, we will wrap things up with that. Yeah.
Oh.
Fred says about this weekend's Yankees Brewers series, Bob Uecker's memory was ruined by New York. Did ESPN do a tribute to Bob because they were in the Bronx for all 3 games? I don't know. I didn't see any of those games, so I could not answer that question, unfortunately.
Let me get back to you, Fred.
Yeah. Maybe when they get, I'm sure when they get to Milwaukee, they'll do plenty. I'm sure on the Milwaukee broadcast, they've done plenty for Bob Uecker as well. All right. So now we're going to wrap things up with that. Man, Fred coming in hot right at the end.
Man, just dropping a big bomb there.
Hit the like button before you leave. We will be back tomorrow. We will talk to you then on IB Nation Sports Talk.